As a sailor, I'd followed the Vendée Globe race since its beginning in 1988. It runs every 4 years, solo nonstop around the world, and I had never any interest whatsoever in sailing this race. It was too hard, too long, too dangerous. Boats were too big, sails were too big. But for the last 20 years, what we've done is create school programs for K-12, mostly middle schools, that connect adventures and expeditions into classrooms, field research stations, and so forth. And the idea is to get kids excited about learning by connecting them to a real adventure out in the real world that's happening right now. And when they don't know what's going to happen next, they pay attention. And being a former school teacher, that's the biggest challenge for a teacher, is to get the kids to pay attention. So when this race came around this most recent time, we thought perhaps we could make a global school program off this uniquely global event. And that was our goal. We have published series in newspapers. It's the most reliable way, actually, to get to schools, certainly in the U.S., where the internet technology has lagged in the schools, although obviously it's the best way to offer the content. So we had 50 different newspapers in the U.S. Under agreement to publish a 15-part series as we went around the world. A comprehensive website of our own, and partners such as AAAS as well, creating special websites for it. Two other constituencies would be asthma and seniors. We'll talk about them in just a moment. One of the things that we did that was pretty cool, I thought, was since I'd be alone on the boat, I'd only be able to work on the school program about 2 hours out of 24, we enlisted the help of this team of experts. And this was a pretty amazing group to both write for this newspaper series, but as well to answer kids' questions online. We had 3 Boston doctors. We had a best-selling author of Longitude and Galileo's Daughter. We had a professor from MIT. We had the head of maritime affairs for the U.S. government, the head of U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. This captain had rescued me off Cape Horn in 1990, so he chimed in from New Zealand. Specialists in oceans and climate change, tanker broker, fisheries expert, maritime art curator, president of the Museum of Science in Boston, wizard technology teacher, a trainer, and a Mount Everest veteran as well. And that was a pretty cool thing. Where else does a kid get to go and ask somebody like that a question? You know, you just don't get that opportunity very often. For the asthma constituency, I've had asthma since I was a kid, and you can see on the graph there on the left that even with the drugs that are on the bottom, the black line is my lung function. It's about 70% of normal, and it gets up to that with those medications. On the right is the age distribution of the skippers in this race, 30 boats, and there are no medications to help that problem. It's a pretty small group that's done this. Only 2 Americans have entered the race in its 5 runnings before this last one. Mike Plant, who sailed the course in the first race and was lost at sea, tragically sailing to the start of the second race in '92. And Bruce Schwab was the first to finish officially. As you can see in the triangle, it's a pretty small group to have done this. And here is the problem. That's an open 60 feet long, 90 feet of mast, 14 and a half feet deep. And you have to eat, sleep, study the weather, write the column for the newspapers, make the repairs both aloft, do all the sail maneuvers in the cockpit or on the foredeck. And this doesn't stop when the video stops. This goes night and day, 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 and so forth. So there are 20 brand new boats for this particular race. We were able to use an older boat from the 2000 vintage, bit of a refit in Maine, and had 51 different lines coming into the cockpit here, control lines. And this was my living room, bedroom, kitchen, etc., for the 4 months at sea. 3 Iridium satellite telephones there, a couple of computers, instrumentation, barograph, desalinator, make fresh water, and 17 weeks worth of food at 6,000 calories a day being the goal. These sorts of races in France are amazing. The public really gets behind them. On the pontoon for the 3 weeks before the start there were 600,000 people came to visit the boats and to talk to the skippers. And it's unique in that the sailors are all right in the middle of the crowd. It doesn't happen here in sports in the U.S. And they really are interested in you, not so much interested in perhaps the specifics of the boats, but they want to know, are you scared? Is your mother scared? Are your sisters scared? How much are you going to sleep? How much are you going to eat? What about the cold in the south? And there was a young boy on the dock who I remember distinctly, and he said, the important thing is to participate. And clearly for us, I wasn't going to win this race. 20 brand new boats. I was the old guy. I was the American. I wasn't going to win it. But we had a different goal, and that goal was the school programs. On race day, 300,000 people lined the channel in Les Sables d'Olonne, west coast of France, to cheer the boats. They were towed single file out to the starting line. And quite an emotional moment. They know what's about to happen, that these 30 boats, 30 sailors are going to go try to sail around the world. And the fleet starts out with a reef in the main, a big storm forecast for the Bay of Biscay later that night and to the next day. And obviously the sponsors are well behind these boats there. And here we go, heading off. And this was a couple of miles into it, and it got a lot worse through the next 24, 36 hours as we got into the 50-knot headwinds. 4 boats had to abandon the race in the first 48 hours, 3 broken masts, 1 boat starting to break up because of the pounding, and 5 boats had to return for repairs, including Michel Desjoyeaux, who's probably the greatest sailor in the world. But he started again a day later, never wavering in his belief that he could succeed. For me, I had a problem too, not with the boat so much, but with me. I got tossed across the cabin, fetched up on a handrail, got jackknifed through a door opening, and over the next couple of days and multiple conversations with the emergency medicine doctor back in Boston, he determined that I'd broken 1 or 2 ribs. Painful injury, particularly when you have to still keep maneuvering the boat. But it's the Vendée Globe. You have to race the race. You keep going. And so when I got south of the Canaries, finally, I decided I had to put up the big spinnaker. And this is just, for any of you who are sailors in the crowd, you've all done this probably at least once. But I set the spinnaker in the middle of the night, and this is what happened a couple of times. This is when you lean into the cabin and you say, if anybody wants to come up and help, now would be a good time. And there's never any answer. Heading south, we got through that and continued along south towards the equator, and got down into the intertropical convergence zone. Being an asthmatic, I pay attention to breathing. I could distinguish individual dolphins in this group by their sounds. And this huge flying fish came aboard. Just like yesterday, we saw the flying fish in Mike Gunton's video. The boat acts like a predator. They think it's a predator. They leap out of the water to escape, and sometimes they come back at the boat, and they're zinging through the cockpit. And this was a real monster, and sometimes you wear goggles to protect your eyes. The newspaper program goes on all the time. The school program is going on every day, about 2 hours a day. These were just the first 3 installments. We were reaching 7 million readers and about 250,000 school kids in the program, and with a huge concentration in the state of Missouri, which was pretty cool. And I'm not sure what happened with that one. Well, we'll keep going. Or maybe we won't. Well, across the South Atlantic towards the Southern Ocean, 2 ice gates here shown. There were 7 of these across the Southern Ocean we had to stay north of to try to keep the fleet out of the icebergs, and then into the Indian Ocean. And down there it gets pretty cold pretty quickly, and the gales start. This was gale number 2. Our group had about 5 gales going across the Indian Ocean. It's blowing about 40 here. Later that night, it got up to over 60 knots, steady for a considerable amount of time, and it's just hair-raising. And all you can see is the white of the waves cresting towards you, and you're just hoping that they don't overwhelm the boat. But Anyway, continued along the day after Christmas, south of Australia, about 900 miles south of Australia, also about 900 miles north of Antarctica. Got tossed out of the bunk and made a one-point landing on my eye, and called Dr. Barney Walt again back in Boston to see what I should do about this. It was, when I came out of the bunk, it was about 6 feet down, landed on that eyebrow. So I got up, felt my head, that seemed okay, then here, that seemed okay, then, and this hand came away soaking wet. And I turned on the light because it was the middle of the night and it was red. And then looked in the mirror and I couldn't see this side of my face for all the blood. And thought momentarily about taking a picture of it to send into all the media in the U.S. that doesn't pay attention to sailing because it's sort of a sissy sport, you know. So anyway, Dr. Barney Walt explained to me what to do. I finally got it cleaned up and put that nice little tape on it, sent that picture into him as well, and he said, that's pretty good work. If you're looking for work after, the emergency room could use you. On deck all the way across the south, I wore the helmet and the full visor to protect myself. I got whacked pretty hard by the storm jib sheet on the first night with the first gale. And a very serious episode was happening up ahead. And this was Jan Elias, who was a young French sailor. And he was on the bow, and the boat took off at about 22 knots down a wave, buried itself. He was crushed against the bow pulpit, broke his thigh bone, pelvis, and back. Somehow dragged himself back into the cabin. The race organizers diverted two of the boats, Mark Guillemot and the gray boat there, to go back to help him. And the tradition of the sea is to go to the aid of a mariner in distress without question, without discussion. And Mark turned around immediately and sailed back to where Jan was. 2 days later, the Australian Navy got there and were able to take him off. We went north of the Kerguelen Islands as we got across there, and then towards the last ice gate in the Indian Ocean. And our group, as we had entered the Indian Ocean, we had 5 boats, all about 500, in a group of about 500 miles, 100 miles apart. And one by one, through those gales, we lost boats from that group. First boat, broken rudder. Second boat, broken autopilot. Third boat was turned upside down in the third gale, and when the boat came back up, the mast was cracked at the top. And the fourth guy who was up ahead of me started to talk about dropping out, perhaps, because his mainsail was coming apart. And this was pretty unnerving to me, because then I'd have to head across the Pacific alone. The next boat ahead was 1,000 miles ahead. The next boat behind was 1,000 miles behind, about 4 days for each of those intervals. And if I got into the middle of the Pacific and the same thing happened as what happened to Jan, the Australian Navy would be a week away, not 2 days away. And so I headed out into the Pacific alone, nonetheless, after Johnny dropped out. And about 2 days in, I got an email from Samantha Davies, young British skipper who was well up ahead. And she said, "Hi, Rich. I see you've lost your last running mate from your group. It won't be much fun to sail the Pacific alone, so I'll be your virtual running mate. Check in with you every couple of days." And this, I can't tell you how emotionally useful this was to me, to have a competitor out there. The camaraderie amongst these skippers is really an astonishing thing. And Samantha was doing great things. She did check in every couple of days, an astute observer of another's predicament, and she acted on it, which was even better. Just a reminder that half of the way around the world was sailed in the dark of night. And across the Pacific, 5,000 miles to Cape Horn, we dodged a big storm in the middle, only named storm that encountered any part of the fleet. So I made the big detour there. Unfortunately, the storm decided to stall and stayed right in front of me, so it was a little bit difficult to get back up to that last ice gate. And at that last ice gate, a number of things started to go wrong. The wind instruments at the top of the mast failed, and the implication of that is that then the autopilots have to run on the compass alone, and they can't follow the wind around. The implication of that is that because the keels on these boats are on a huge hinge and can go 45 degrees on either side, if the boat happens to jibe or tack accidentally, then everything is on the wrong side and the boat just lays over at 70 degrees and sits there. But anyway, we continued along. I went aloft to the second spreader about 65 feet up the mast to make a repair just before we got to Cape Horn. That was exciting because the mast is waving around, so the ropes you're going up on are waving around. So you go up with a helmet, elbow pads, knee pads, hiking boots, because you do get bashed into the mast. It's swinging back and forth, bam, bam, bam. And that's I was definitely dressed down for that. But another serious episode happening up ahead, which was Jean Le Cam hit something in the water, and the bulb on his keel came off. There's a big bulb that will be at the top of that fin, and when that broke off, his counterweight was gone. The boat immediately turned over. The next boat behind him, Vincent Rioux, sailed up to him as fast as he could. He was a couple hundred miles back, and circled until Jean finally came out of the boat, sat on the bottom between the two rudders. Vincent went around trying to throw a line to him to get him off. He made 3 passes, missed each time, went desperately close the 4th time, got the line to Jean. Jean jumped in the water. He winched him across, but then they both noticed that in that episode there was a collision between the boats, and Vincent had damaged his own mast, which came down the next day as they headed in towards Chile. Vincent was the defending champion from 2004. He had sacrificed his race to save his friend. It was a remarkable thing. Day 78.
19,500 miles.
Finally.
Cape Horn. Didn't think we were going to see it. Going out the reef, going from the 3rd reef to the 2nd reef. 165 grinds on the pedestal winch in the medium gear, by the way. And looked up, and there it was.
Always a great thing to get around Cape Horn. On up into the Atlantic, though, a huge storm was awaiting us. It's spinning out of southern Brazil. Had to make a big detour to go around this. Again, there was little chance at this point of me catching the next boat ahead or being caught by the boat behind. And so I made a big detour to try to go downwind on the proper side of this storm rotating clockwise. And in that, the worst happened with the boat jibing in the middle of the night at 24.5 knots, 3 reefs in the main and the storm jib up, down 25-foot seas, jibed, and the keel's on the wrong side, the sails are on the wrong side, and the boat just lays over at about 70 degrees. And we had a protocol to try to get out of that, but it takes about a half an hour or so, and you have to jibe the boat back, and there's a huge crash, and you hope the mast stays in the boat, and it did. But a couple of days later, up the coast a little further, we had a double autopilot failure, and I can steer for 1 hour, 5 hours, 11 hours, but it can't steer all the way back to France by hand. And so when this happened, this was the most vulnerable I felt on the whole race. This was just going to be a game ender, and I was able to find out what was wrong after about 4 hours and repair a broken bolt, and we continued along. But I was pretty demoralized at that point, pretty discouraged. I was only getting the goal had been 5 hours of sleep a day in 90-minute segments. That got to 45 minutes, and that got down to much less than that, particularly with this autopilot problem, where you have to go into the cockpit every 15 to 20 minutes to look at the masthead wind instruments to see what's going on and then make your adjustments. And so pretty demoralized, only getting probably 15 to 20 minutes of sleep at a time at this point until the last, really all the way up the Atlantic. This has to be the default philosophy of everyone who's in the Vendée Globe. And it's been at the chart table of all of our voyages that we've made. Whenever you need a little bit of a laugh, you take a look at that and continue along. School program continues, of course, through all the remaining weeks. We're now up to about week 15. And way up ahead, Michel Desjoyeaux, never doubting his skills, had sailed through the fleet and had won the race going away. A spectacular effort. There were 7 more boats came in behind. And this is the difficulty when we got into the North Atlantic Ocean. You can see weather pattern here. Gale, new storm, storm, developing gale, gale, developing gale, gale. And this is all moving in a big cauldron, and pretty problematic and pretty discouraging, frankly. As we're that big white line way up on the northwest corner, had to make a big detour around the last high-pressure system to get finally heading towards France. But it was all worth it, ultimately. And here it came in. Who said the French don't like Americans? The guy out there with a huge American flag to celebrate us coming in. This is really what they wanted you to do. They wanted you to come home from the sea. They wanted you to sail well. They wanted you to tell them about it as you were at sea. French being very romantic, and that was a big part of it for them. So 121 days at sea, big crowd on the dock to greet us as we came in. And then they take you right up through the crowd, right up onto a stage to get your immediate emotions after completing this arduous 4-month task. Oh, not sure that's going to show either. Huh. Anyway, got up onto the stage and said basically that for me there'd been 2 Vendée Globes. One Vendée Globe at sea, very difficult, very long, very beautiful at times, but one Vendée Globe on land as well, and that was beautiful also because the French had been so welcoming, so encouraging to me through this entire process. And as I said, they wanted you to do well, they wanted you to come home. And what began to happen was that they would ask, are you going to be back for 2012? And coming up the Atlantic, I had said, absolutely not. I'm probably never going to go sailing again. This is just way too hard. But the sincerity of their inquiries really demanded a thoughtful response. And the next couple of days, the next 2 boats came in, Raphael and Norbert, and you can sort of see in the warmth between the skippers there that respect that goes on in this sport. This particular event had become the most popular one of all of Vendée Globes to date, everything up 50 to 70% from the last year. And then I guess 10 weeks later, the prize giving on the beach of Les Sables d'Olonne with 100,000 people coming to say farewell to the skippers and to thank them one more time. Guy in a suit in that picture, too. But again, more conversations with people who sincerely asked if we'd be back. And so I had to really think about it and finally came up with a couple of bullet points that if we could expand the school program globally, we had about 15 countries participating, if we could firm up distribution channels for asthma and get a relationship with the AARP, of course, 40 million members, and also be able to get access to a boat that was simply faster for the same physical effort, so that you took the last 10 days of that race off when the fatigue is just going exponential for both the boat and the skipper, then we would try that again. Because that's the contribution that I could make. Thank you. My mother won't be glad to hear that. We took Great American 3 back to the Port La Forêt where we'd prepared the boat, and she was my shipmate. I had guided her. She had defended me on the great oceans of the world, and finally it was time for us both to rest. Thank you.